Will AI improve our lives or exterminate the species? What would it take to abolish poverty? Are you eating enough fermented foods? These are some of the questions we've tackled recently on The Next Big Idea. I'm Rufus Griscom, and every week I sit down with the world's leading thinkers for in-depth conversations that will help you live, work, and play smarter. Follow The Next Big Idea wherever you get your podcasts.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessie Hempel, host of the Hello Monday podcast. Start your week with the Hello Monday podcast. We'll navigate career pivots. We'll learn where happiness fits in. Listen to Hello Monday with me, Jessie Hempel, on the LinkedIn Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the American Negotiation Institute's podcast, where we will teach you the skills you need to get more out of life. And now your host, Kwame Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Negotiation for Entrepreneurs. My name is Kwame Christian. I'm a business lawyer and I am passionate about teaching entrepreneurs like you how to be more persuasive and get more for your business. Before we get into this episode, I want to remind you about that free giveaway. It's a list of all of the things that are negotiable in your business and personal life. One of the main reasons why people don't negotiate is because a lot of times we don't know what is negotiable. So I made this list so you could start to identify those areas of opportunities in your own life. So if you're interested, you can get it by going to AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com/list. So that's AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com/LIST. And I'm going to put a link to that in the description of the podcast too. So I am very excited about this interview. We are speaking today with Natasia Malaihollo. She is a very successful entrepreneur doing exciting things in the tech industry. And I first met her actually when I was in law school. So if you remember back to the introduction episode, you remember I mentioned about how I did negotiation competitions in law school. So I was at a national competition in Washington, D.C., and I met her because she was watching the competition because she's good friends with my negotiation partner for the competition. His name is Chris Bordnave. So when I was chatting with Chris a couple of weeks ago and telling him about the podcast, he said, "Oh, you should chat with Natasia. I think she'd be a good guest." So here she is. Before we get started, I want to focus you on a few key points that she makes. She talks about what kind of deals to avoid and how you can identify which deals to walk away from. She also talks about understanding the difference between good money and bad money, how to negotiate within your team and within your leadership structure, how to know when to bring in help in making decisions in the business and deciding which opportunities you should take advantage of, and lastly, how to address issues of fairness. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. We are here today with Natasia Malaihollo, and she is CEO of Wyzerr, but she is a serial entrepreneur, but very, very successful. So we're really happy to have her here today. So Natasia, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So let's start off by telling the audience a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey.
Sure. So my journey started, I never planned on being an entrepreneur, and I was actually on a panel earlier this week in Chicago, and they asked me the same question. I said, that entrepreneurship kind of found me. I graduated with a legal studies major when I was undergrad at Berkeley, and then worked in corporate law for 3.5 years, actually corporate and intellectual property law. And I kind of fell in love with IP and the tech side by being in, patents and things like that. So ended up going to Georgetown for law school. And in my first year, came up with this idea for a social network, an app to find local information, and kind of became obsessed with the idea. And so after my first year, decided to, I couldn't do both. I couldn't be a law student and I couldn't be an entrepreneur. And so I chose being an entrepreneur. I raised a little bit of money, and that was enough for me to say, okay, I'm leaving law school. And so kind of jumped in there, went into an accelerator program in Arkansas, and then just never looked back.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that company?
Yeah, so the company was called Sooligan. The idea was around digital word of mouth. So, for example, whenever I go out and about in the city, I go to a restaurant or I see something cool in the city, like I'll post about it on Facebook or on Twitter. And the people that are following me or are friends with me on Facebook, they generally are people that I know, like friends and family. And those people are not necessarily the same people that would benefit from my updates about the city because they don't live in the same city as I do. And so the idea for this network was that you could post things and it would be automatically sent to everyone around you, like based on geolocation. It was like very hyper local. And so, again, like the vision was really that as you're walking down the street and you want to go to Subway, you just look down on our app and you would see like someone at Subway just posted, oh, the line here is really long or the service is really bad, and you could avoid it. You could just kind of go directly another place. And it was like this idea of like open communication with like the people around you without you necessarily having to be friends on Facebook or follow each other on Twitter.
And how long did you do that for?
3.5 years. And I think, the problem with that company was that it was really, it was around, we launched it at a time where social media was like really saturated. And the moment somebody heard that we were another social media app, they were like, oh, I don't need another social media app. I already have Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And so they weren't really as open to another social media app. And I think it was a little ahead of its time in that like a lot of the technologies around hyper-local and stuff was still developing. And so it wasn't as good as it would have been had we launched later. The interesting part is that earlier this year, Microsoft launched an app that was almost identical to that app.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of serves as pretty good proof of concept, though, after the
fact. Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, so tell us about your newest endeavor.
So I'm currently working on a startup called Wyzerr. The easiest thing to explain is that we make customer feedback surveys that look and feel like games. So we make it really fun, fast, and easy for customers and consumers to provide feedback to companies. All of our surveys are under 60 seconds, and we can do about 25 questions right now under 60 seconds.
That's impressive because that's information that's crucial for business success for the bigger companies.
Yep.
But I know as one of the people who's often targeted for these surveys, I hate doing the surveys. Hate them. But if it's a game, I love to play. So
yeah, exactly.
I think that's a great idea. So how have things been going with this business?
Oh man, it's been great. It's just like so when we started it 2 years ago, we were in a business program, an accelerator program out in New York, and we came in as the first company. And during the program, the director, one of the investors of the program, basically was like, hey, I really don't think this company is going anywhere. You guys need to start a new idea, or a new company. And so I started Wyzerr within that 24 hours, and within also that 24 hours, we signed our very first customer. Like this is before we even had a name for the company. We didn't really know what it was going to do, but someone that owned like 60 restaurants walked into our office that morning, and everyone pitched an idea, and I pitched the new idea, and he was like, I love that. How much does that cost? And I threw out a number. He was like, yeah, that's great. And so we signed our first customer. We didn't even have a name yet, and so it was pretty cool. And I thought, I think we have something here, because we literally just made more money in one day than we did in 3 years the other company.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, that's cool. So then after that, it was just off to the races.
Yeah, and Wyzerr's grown pretty quickly. Within like 3 months, we were on a lot of the New York lists for like the most disruptive technology, or some of the best startups of New York lists and things like that. And so, and eventually we moved back to California and worked there, which is where I'm from. And then moved around a little bit. But then last year we got into the Brandery Accelerator in Cincinnati and ended up, moving to Cincinnati for the program, raised, our seed round here in the area. And so we just stayed in the area.
Very nice. So how would you say your ability to negotiate has helped accelerate your business success in either business?
Well, for the first startup, I don't really know if there was much negotiation, but with the second startup, what I've realized is that we have a very high standard, and we've come to a place that we're able to kind of stand our ground and not really, I guess, what's the word that I'm looking for? Kind of be persuaded or, sway on our decisions around what we believe in. And so we try to negotiate, fairly and justly, and whether it's like a client or a partnership or an investor. And sometimes it's just if it's not a fit, like if they're not willing to negotiate and not willing to come, to a middle ground, like we just walk away from the deal.
And I'm glad you said that, because that's one of the most important skills to have in a negotiation, the ability to know when the deal isn't for you and to walk away.
Hey you, I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all, and it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/marketer. Terms and conditions apply.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Can you give us some... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to actually give you some examples.
Perfect.
So, earlier in 2015, we literally had run out of money. We had we were at the end, we had no money, and we had a deal from an investor for $500,000. It was $500,000. And we just we negotiated, and we just felt like it wasn't really going the right direction. So we walked away from the deal, even though we didn't have a plan. We just knew that in the long run, it would be a bad deal for us. And then the same thing happened this recent round, our actual seed round. We had someone come in again with a deal that had a lot of things tied to it, that was contingent on a lot of different things. And we were willing to negotiate. We were willing to kind of work with the investors, but we were there's just certain things we can't agree to, because in the long run, it would hurt our company, and we walked away from that. Similarly, we had a deal with a client, a really big client, and it was a lucrative deal. The agreement was $100 a response, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
For a survey provider, you're getting paid $100 a response.
Wow.
But the deal ended up. I mean, the actual survey campaign that they wanted to run. We can do 25 questions in under 60 seconds, but they're 25-hour type of questions. So they follow a science. There's a lot of thought put into what kinds of questions are asked and things like that, because if you ask long questions, people don't want to take the survey, and it ruins the quality of our surveys. And so the client would not budge on the questions, and we just, when we analyzed it, we thought, and we kept trying to negotiate. We spent months negotiating it with trying to negotiate, and finally we just realized, when we stepped back, we realized that if the campaign runs the way they want it to run, it's not going to work the way that we know it's supposed to work, and they're going to see it as a failure on our part. And in the long run, a failure on our part is worse than us just not taking the money, no matter how much money we made in the process. So we ended up walking away from that deal as well. But a couple months later, they came back, and now they're running Wyzerr exactly the way we told them to run it. So.
Nice. It's funny. Now that's the second time you've gotten good proof of concept after the fact.
Yep.
So it is. That's cool. So let's get into these deals. I think you've given some really great examples here, but I want to get deeper into them. Because like I said, walking away is often the hardest thing to do in a negotiation, especially as entrepreneurs, because we always want to make that deal and make that money. So
Yeah.
so what were some of those things, like just a little bit more in depth? I don't know if there's confidentiality issues. If not, if there are, just we could avoid the question. But what kind of things were signals to you that it was a bad deal? Either of them.
Yeah, so for one of them, for the investment deal, like one of them was that it was tied to like a lease agreement. And like for a startup, and a 5-year lease agreement at that. So for a startup with a runway of 2 years, like, every startup, when you raise money, usually it's to kind of fund your company, expecting like if you make $0 and you're going to fund, run the operations for 18 to 24 months. So for a company that has an 18 to 24 month runway, it just didn't make sense for us to have a 5-year lease agreement. But on top of that, it was like tied to like a certain size of the space. So again, like we're a very small team, like it didn't make sense for us to get this huge open office space if we weren't, if we don't need it, because now you're just giving away equity for early stage startups like Wyzerr. Your equity is the most valuable thing that you have. Like it's more valuable than cash. And so there was a lot of different things like that, was a requirement of the investment that we just couldn't agree to.
That makes sense. And it's clear that your ability to kind of forecast and look into the future played a big role in making those decisions too.
Yeah, so when I sat down with like some other, like depending on like what the background of the person was, or the advisor, like it was crazy how many people had such different opinions about this. Because on the one hand, they were like, well, Natasia, if you take this money, like this is another 500,000, like it would put you guys over here. Like you guys have to pay rent somewhere. You might as well pay rent and get like extra money and stuff. But then there were other people that was like, if you look at it this way, you're giving away equity in like, because you don't need it, and all this like other stuff. So it's always like from your viewpoint, like sometimes people always tell you like not all money is good money, and you just have to be smart about taking like the right investors' money and stuff. And I think we made it was hard, definitely, like because when you think about like, okay, $500,000, that's going to give me another like 6 months of runway or another 5 months of runway. And so but when you kind of step back and think about like in the long run, like if you really believe in your company and your ideas, then you're not going to be willing to give away all this equity for $500,000. I mean, technically you should be making $500,000 in the next like 5 months.
Right. I want to key in on another thing you said. You said you ran the situation by your advisors.
Yep.
Is that something you typically do when it's a big decision or you're in a significant negotiation?
Yes. So I'll look to some experts. Like I know that I'm not. I'm good in certain things, but I'm not really great in like finance and like economics and things like that. And so generally, especially with things come up in finance and kind of economics, like I ask experts or people around me that know more and are able to forecast and kind of paint the different scenarios. So yeah, I do that a lot, especially when it comes to like finance.
Yeah. As entrepreneurs, it's always a great idea to bring in experts like you did and get second opinions, because a lot of times, especially if you're solo, you or even if you're working on a team, you're in an echo chamber. Everybody says the same things, and
exactly.
You hear it enough, and it sounds good. So getting that second, third, fourth opinion is always helpful.
Yep.
That's good. So can you give some examples of times that you had to negotiate with people on your team, like within your organization or people close to you?
Yeah, so I mean, as a startup, you're in a high stress situation, and there's a lot expected of you, and especially once you start taking funding and you start hiring other people, like there's a lot. People look to you to make a lot of the hard decisions, and there was a couple of incidents where my co-founders and I weren't seeing eye to eye, and I think sometimes, and as a entrepreneur, like sometimes people just think and I've seen this happen a lot to startups around me, is like people just think it's easier just to go your separate ways. And it's easier just to be like, well, especially if you're like the CEO or the main founder or whatever it is, like someone like me, like sometimes at one point it seemed like it was easier just to be like, okay, well, I don't really want to work with you anymore. Like, you don't agree with me, and I don't really think this is negotiable. Like, this is just something I believe in. You don't believe in the same thing, so I think we should just go our separate ways. But like, so that was like my mindset for a little bit when at first, like when some of these incidents started happening, was just like, I can't compromise. But eventually, like, you kind of have to, if you're thinking about a team and you're thinking about a company, like, you kind of have to take yourself out of it and think about like the long-term effects and like what does your decision mean for the rest of the team and for the company? And like in that moment, I kind of just, when I took a step back, I thought, okay, like, he may not see eye to eye with me right now, but that's okay, because like, it's good that people don't see eye to eye with me. Like, you get differences of opinion. You don't want everybody to think the same way, because otherwise, like, we're building for one type of person. And so I ended up negotiating and just kind of talking through like, okay, this is what I'm willing to give up on. This is really why I'm willing, what I'm willing to do. And I think that decision has been the most productive and like probably the best decision I ever made, because I know I would have regretted that decision if I had just been like, no, I'm not going to negotiate with you.
And about how long was that process?
It was, I really want to say like the entire thing kind of happened over a month. Mm-hmm. So like, but it was really intense, like the first two weeks, and then we kind of settled it after a month.
That's good. So you only have one partner with Wyzerr?
I have two.
Two partners. Okay.
Yeah.
Did they start with you out of New York, both of them?
Yes, they did. Well, one of them has been working with me for like 5 years now. He actually started with the first company.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is because one of the toughest things for people to do when they're starting their company with partners is kind of dividing the pieces of a pie that doesn't yet exist.
Right.
So how were you able to have those types of conversations with these partners?
Well, so with my first startup, like it didn't really end well. Like when the founders and I, like, we left, I think looking back, like, I definitely wish things had been differently, but it was just like we had spent so much time and effort on the company that we were just both like exhausted. And like, like when something fails, you all have your reasons on why it failed. And I think everybody, like, there's like your side, the other person's side, and there's the true story of like what happened. Mm-hmm. And so like looking at that, I just knew that I didn't want to go through that process again. And so when I set up Wyzerr, like I had this like great idea for a company and like what we would do. I had like a set of things that I just couldn't like, I guess I couldn't negotiate on. Like, I'm going to own this percentage, and this is what I can offer you. And if you don't want to take it, then I don't know if I can work on it. Like, we can work together. And in like retrospect, it kind of was, maybe it was like unfair of me or unjust of me, but I just know like what I bring to the table, and I feel like it was fair, and I still feel like it is fair.
Mm-hmm. How did you communicate that to them in a way that it didn't seem like you were kind of dictating to them, but still making it clear that you wanted to work on a team?
Correct, exactly. Like it's still definitely a team. But what I realized in like my first startup was that and I've seen so many startups fail because of this reason. Like, so when startup founders start, everybody is like really excited and everybody is like really happy. But generally there's one person on that team that really started the company. Like that, that's the idea, like the ideation came, like the ideas and all that come from like all the vision and kind of sense. And that person ends up usually being like the CEO of the company. But when startup founders start, they're always like super excited, and everybody has this like feel good like moment, and they're like, yeah, let's just divide everything together. And that division of like equity and the division of like responsibilities, it sounds great on paper, but when you start working, there's always one person that's going to outwork everyone. And that's just the way that person is. And that person, again, is probably the CEO, like ended up being the CEO of the company. And over time, if there isn't that like division of like, you know, the equity or like compensation or whatever it is, like that person is going to resent everybody else. And because they're like, well, we're all equally yoked, like we're all supposedly have equal responsibilities and we all have equal equity. Why am I doing all the work? And that's how founders fall apart. Like, and people call me all the time to like get my advice on like founder situations. And at the root cause of any founder breakup is always that reason, is that one person was like, well, I did all the work, but we have equal equity, or we're getting equal compensation, and I don't think it's fair. And so when you just like assume, and you know it's going to be true that there's going to be one person on that team that's going to do all, like that's always at the office, that's always doing the work, that's just like putting in a little bit more or maybe a lot more than everybody else. Like, you know, that's how you avoid like the fights and the stuff later.
Right. That's a great point. It is a great point because, for me in my law practice, whenever I see people come in or they want to split everything 50-50, it's like, hey, write up this operating agreement. We're 50-50 owners. I'm like, oh, no, it's happening again.
That's the worst idea.
Yeah, I actually created this free course for my business law clients, a partnership bootcamp that they can go through where they kind of think through all of those things that you mentioned. So they could get on the same page beforehand. Like, what are your perceptions and expectations of each of the owners? What are the roles and responsibilities?
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. And a lot of times, what's funny is I have the people work through it independently. Yeah. And so then they send me their responses, then we come in and talk about it. And so in addition to that, in addition to sending in their own responses, I have them guess what the other person is going to say. Yeah. And a lot of times they are not close.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's fascinating. That's the first time I've heard of something like that, but I think that's definitely useful.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Because one of the things that we analyze are the values of the person. And so, for instance, you could have somebody who is very philanthropic, and somebody who's very power focused, somebody who's spiritual, and so if you have somebody who's very power seeking or money seeking, linked with somebody who's more philanthropic, doing it for the community, you're going to have some serious issues coming when money starts coming in the door.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's good.
That makes sense.
So let's talk about your negotiation philosophy, just in general. What would you say your philosophy is when you're in a negotiation with outside entities or even people within your company?
I don't know if I have a philosophy, to be completely honest. I think I just kind of follow. I try to stick to the facts, like, and that's really like what I think I'm really good at, is that I'm really open to the other side arguments. I'm really open to different scenarios and stuff, but I try to closely follow facts and what's fair. I think that's always been how I think and how I operate. It's just like what's fair. Like when I tell the story, like, I mean, this is a true story, but like when I was younger, when my mom and my parents would buy me Skittles, like I would be the one that like opens the entire bag and divides out the Skittles, and so that everybody has an equal share of Skittles. Like nobody's just going to get a random like sample size, of Skittles. And I think that when it comes down to negotiation, it's the same way. Like it's just like, what I see as fair and what I see as like factual.
Right. I like that. So this is your Skittles negotiation philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So how do you define fair? Like in every situation, fairness is, it can take different forms, and to some people fair could look very different than for someone fair could look very different than it looks to somebody else. So how do you define fair, or how do you find it?
I look at anything that, like, the supporting documents or the supporting, like, again, like, factual documents. Not like I don't really care for opinions, in my opinion. Like, like, I just don't care for your opinion. I really don't care about, like, what someone thinks is right, what a philosophy about, like, well, this is what you should be doing and stuff. Like, there's a contract usually in place, and there's an agreement usually in place, and there's a set rules or responsibilities or tasks, and either you're doing it or you're not. And so and again, like, the assessment of whether or not someone's doing something, I mean, again, you, like, look at the results. Like, if you say you're working hard, but you haven't, like, all the things that you're doing isn't leading us to make sales or make progress in development or make progress in design or, like, whatever it is, like, you're not really doing your job. You're ineffectively, like, using your time. You're spending time, but you're not spending it effectively. And so, I mean, I try to, like, stick again to, like, what the evidence and, like, what's there.
I like it. Yeah, that's good. Okay, and if you had to give one piece of advice to our listeners when it comes to negotiation, what would it be?
I think you always have to remember why. Remember the why. Right. I would say, like, I think, like, in the entrepreneurship world or startup world, like, a lot of startup founders like to post this, like, remember why you started. I mean, it's the same way in, like, negotiations. It's like, remember why we're even negotiating, or remember why you're selling this product. I mean, remember why you started this team. Like, I think you always have to focus on the why, because if you focus on the why, then, like, all the little stuff, the little details, they tend to matter a little bit less, because, like, one of the things startup founders like to argue over is equity, like, especially with, like, in valuation. So, like, you might be looking at $1 million investment or a $500,000 investment or a $100,000 investment, but and then you're looking at how much equity you lose, and you're like, I don't think this is, I'm going to try to negotiate and get a higher valuation. And in my opinion, that's stupid, because, like, you're not thinking about the why. Like, yeah, there's some places that you can, like, if you can negotiate and it's just really, like, an outrageous valuation, like, if they're going to, value your company at a very low valuation and it just doesn't make sense, then yeah, negotiate it. But if it's fair, given what you have, and if you think about the why, like, the why you're raising money is to grow the company and become better and raise your valuation, then in the long run, like, taking maybe a smaller valuation than what you would like means that you can grow really quickly and you can progress really quickly. So, I think, like, definitely just always remember, like, why something is happening, why you're doing something.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And what's interesting, throughout this conversation, I'm starting to kind of get a read on the things that are important to you, kind of like your why. And so obviously growing the company, that's one, but you also have you want to retain the integrity of your assessments as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's good. All right. Well, thank you so much for your insight. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you so much. Like, I didn't even realize that I did so much negotiations, because I was like, yeah, I do, actually.
Yeah. What's funny is that most people don't. But that's great. And let's tell the listeners where they can find you and get access to some of your resources.
Yeah, so I'm online. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, Natasia Malaihollo. But our website is wyzerr.com, WYZERR.com, and all of my social media and my emails and things like that are online on our website.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if your company ever needs any kind of fun, fast surveys, please check out Wyzerr. As you've heard, it's a great company, and Natasia is awesome. So give her a shout out if you are in need of those kinds of services. And I also wanted to update you. A listener from across the country actually reached out to me a couple of weeks ago. He's a fellow lawyer and asked me to serve as a negotiation consultant on a multi-million-dollar case he's trying to settle. So I've had a blast working with him thus far. He's a great guy. So if any of you are looking for coaching, consulting, or trainings for your team on negotiation or persuasion, just let me know, and I'll see what I can do to help you out. I can help whether it's a specific situation or just coaching in general. Also, my law firm is in Ohio, so if you're a Buckeye and you need legal assistance for your business, please feel free to reach out. I'd also like to give a shout out to Cavalier Consulting in Cincinnati. Kobe from Cavalier has been doing a great job helping to produce the podcast and promote the podcast, and just really appreciate his diligent work. And I also want to thank you listeners, most importantly, for all of your support. If you've liked what you've heard thus far, please feel free to subscribe and write a review. If you have topics that you'd like me to talk about, let me know. I want to make sure that the content that I'm providing is relevant to what you're going through. Similarly, if you've used these techniques successfully, and like our friend Carmen in the last episode I mentioned, let us know, because I think we all benefit from hearing your success stories, and it makes us all excited and amped to use these techniques. So thank you again for listening, and next Monday is going to be our next episode. You heard it here first. I'm going to be more consistent with dropping these, and from here on out, it's going to be Monday morning. Get ready for the next podcast. So in the meantime, have a great week and keep on negotiating. I will catch you next week.